Time now for our weekend briefing. There are just over 2 weeks left until voters decide who controls Congress and dozens of governor's mansions across the country. This week, we focus on 2 close contests in Arizona. In the open race for governor, Republican Kari Lake, a former Phoenix News anchor, faces Democrat Katie Hobbs, Arizona's Secretary of State. And Democratic Senator Mark Kelly is running for re-election against Republican Blake Masters, who happens to be a venture capitalist. Kelly was first elected during a special election 2 years ago. Andrew Oxford has been covering these races for Arizona Public Media and joins us now. It's great to have you here. And let's start, Andrew, with the governor's race. Of this year's entire slate of pro-Trump candidates, I think it's safe to say that Kari Lake seems to have the best chance of winning. The Democrat in this race, Katie Hobbs, has been criticized for running a low-key campaign. So how is this race shaping up with just a few weeks left to go?
Hobbs is running a relatively muted campaign, and of course, by comparison to Lake, a former television personality, it was always going to be difficult to top, I think, for Hobbs. But I think her campaign would argue that she's trying to focus on the fundamentals. She's not holding big rallies. She's trying to reach voters at the doorstep, on the phones, trying to win votes that way. And I think that's a point Democrats are trying to make, is they're trying to create a contrast between Hobbs, who's a social worker, who's been a legislator and is now Secretary of State, and Lake, who has never been in government before. They're hoping to draw a contrast that will cast Hobbs as really the candidate with the most experience, who's most able to govern. And I think the question going forward is going to be if this focus on fundamentals, this running a more low-key campaign, is really going to be enough. I think there are some Democrats and some independents who want Hobbs to succeed, who would argue it's not enough given the stakes of this race.
And Kari Lake, we mentioned she's a Trump supporter. She's also a known election denier. And last weekend on CNN, she made some headlines for refusing to say that she would accept the results of her own election in Arizona if she lost.
Will you accept the results of your election in November?
I'm going to win the election and I will accept that result.
If you lose, will you accept that?
I'm going to win the election and I will accept that result.
How is the issue of accepting election results, whether it's in the presidential race or the governor's race, how is that factoring into that contest? How is it resonating?
A lot of Democrats in Arizona would argue that that is the issue in this race, right? They would argue that the slate of Republicans running this year is extremist. This is not John McCain's Republican Party anymore, right? And that democracy itself is on the ticket. I'm curious, though, how many Republicans we actually are able to see Democrats peel off in this election. Much as Trump was able to convince a lot of Republicans who maybe didn't like him to come along and support him ultimately because they reasoned that he was at least closer to them on policies that they cared about than his Democratic opponents, I think we're seeing many Republicans in Arizona make a similar calculation.
Well, let's shift our focus now to the Senate race because Blake Masters is another far-right candidate, somebody who has opposed America's involvement back in World War II. He suggested that the attack on the Capitol on January 6th was a false flag operation designed by the FBI. The Democrat in that race, Mark Kelly, the current sitting senator, he has a small but shrinking lead over Masters. Why has Masters been able to make this race more competitive, even though objectively he has flaws as a candidate?
I never expected this race would be a blowout, right? I think it was always bound to be close. Arizona is not a blue state. Arizona's complicated. We have 2 Democratic U.S. senators, yes. Joe Biden won the state in 2020, but he only won by about 10,000 votes. Mark Kelly won his race in 2020 by just a couple percentage points. That's the key, though, right? Mark Kelly outperformed Joe Biden, and that's what he's got to do again this election year if he wants to hold on to this seat. He's had some success at being able to establish himself as, or define his identity sort of separate from politics. Here in Tucson, people know him as, Gabby Gifford's husband, or they know that he's an astronaut. And I think he's going to have to continue to convince enough Republicans and independents that he is separate and apart from a lot of the things that frustrate them or turn them off about the Democratic Party.
Yeah, to your point, Senate races typically aren't as closely tied to the president's standing as House races are. And as you mentioned, Mark Kelly trying to create some space between himself and President Biden. That's particularly true on two key issues, the economy and immigration. Kelly has called the southern border a mess. How are those two issues, the economy, inflation, and immigration, what are voters saying about those two issues and based on your reporting?
Well, let's talk about inflation and the economy. I mean, that's one that I see Kelly running ads about right now. It is a central issue here in Arizona. I think one of the appeals of Arizona to a lot of folks who move here is that we've long been able to say that this is a really affordable place to come and live, to come and retire. A lot of Arizonans now are finding that that's just not the case. Rents and home prices are rising here just as they are in other parts of the country, and that's really taking a bite. That's an issue that candidates of either party are having to speak to, I think, if they want to really convince independent and Republican voters to give them a look.
Andrew Oxford is a politics reporter for Arizona Public Media. Thanks so much for being with us, Andrew.
Thank you.